1, 2, 3, 4. I gave you all I had to give, and I done the best I can. So now it's up to you to finish what I began. Yes, I will always love you, and I'll be there just for you. So in all that you do, my child, to yourself you must be true. So promise me that you will fight for what it is that you believe. No matter what you do in life, it's in the giving that you'll receive. Wherever the road may take you, those you meet along the way, promise me that you will count your blessings every day.
And a very good day, or evening, or morning to you, whenever you happen to catch this. I am Jason Hawes, back here once again on American Faith Today. As always, so good to be back, so good to be here, and especially so good to have you here with me. Hopefully learning something and being informed at least, as I also, even though it is my podcast, am always trying to learn and of course inform myself, but learn right along with you. And as always, I have to at least try to be judicious with my time and wise with my time, as I've got 45 minutes or so in every podcast, the way I have it set up. And as always, a boatload of information that I could share with you or could try to squeeze in, and I will try to squeeze in whatever I can and whatever might seem to be the most important. Now, this show that I am doing here tonight, or this podcast, we're going to call it America's, or excuse me, not America's, we could call it America's, but we're going to call it Our Israel First President. Our Israel First President, which obviously stands in stark contrast, to his America First declaration. But before I get started with all of that, I do want to, as I was getting wired up or getting prepared to get back to doing another podcast, as I was kind of getting in that mode and in that mood, I want to mention something that's a little bit humorous to me, and may or may not be to you, but it is kind of funny how things work out sometimes, I suppose. Many of you would maybe know, especially if you've listened to this, that for any length of time, and with the places that I tend to share this as well, these podcasts, one of the things that both I and probably a number of my listeners have in common is a Bible teaching ministry by the name of Shepherd's Chapel out of Gravette, Arkansas, that was started by the late Pastor Arnold Murray and is now being run by his surviving son, Dennis Murray. And they do live Monday through Friday, live teachings and live studies, but they also do a lot of kind of pre-recorded or studies from the past on a particular day. They're actually, you can pull them up anytime online, you can listen, or you can watch on satellite or what have you, literally 24 hours a day. They do have a block of time, an hour of time scheduled each weekday for live programming, which again could be literal live programming or it might be something pre-recorded. But I was looking at possibly getting back into the Bible and doing a Bible study on the book of James. And I did one on the book of Daniel some time back, and occasionally I still see when I get information as far as what's been watched or what's being listened to or what was listened to in a given week. Sometimes I still see like a podcast from the Book of Daniel series, which is nice. But like I said, I was going to do the Book of James and looking at Shepherd's Chapel's study schedule and what they're covering. Of course, what they just started this week, oddly enough, was the Book of James. So inasmuch as to me they are the best, and I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with them, to check them out and certainly make your own mind up. But inasmuch as to me they're the best teaching ministry I've ever come across, I will, at this time anyway, a second witness and a second voice may not hurt, and there are people who listen who probably aren't familiar with Shepherd's Chapel, or may not be familiar, but especially for those who do listen, and our Shepherd's Chapel students as well, I will yield to the chapel right now on that study of the book of James. But with that, again, looking at news stories, what I came across, or what's been preeminent in the news this week, of course, has been, and this sounds like it's going to be totally unrelated, but it is a lead-in, and it did kind of get my brain juices, my brainstorming a little bit, and my creative juices flowing in terms of coming up with a topic or a subject. But obviously what's been in the news here has been the release by Attorney General William Barr of the redacted Mueller report. And certainly, as I just already gave the topic, our Israel First President, I'm not going to comment too much on the Mueller report. I did a show called Don't Go to the Circus, because that's what politics is. It's a circus, meant to distract, meant to divide. But I did a show on the Mueller report when Attorney General William Barr first released his 4-page, I believe it was 4-page summary of the report. And I said back then, and I'll maintain that much today, that to me, William Barr, his son-in-law, I believe, part of the White House legal counsel now, Barr, who was very critical of Mueller looking into obstruction of justice, and also Barr, or even Jeff Sessions, who was Trump's original Attorney General, whom after attacking, maligning, insulting Sessions in every way possible from time to time, mostly on Twitter, of course, to where eventually, by Trump's request, if I'm not mistaken, Sessions tendered his resignation. So he then gets William Barr to be kind of his Attorney General. And I do believe that he's kind of there to protect Donald Trump. Now, it's very interesting, though, because, and again, for time's sake, I'm not going to go into any more depth on the Mueller report. I think I covered everything pretty much, or gave my opinion pretty much in that podcast that dealt with it primarily. Don't go to the circus. But it is interesting that as the things that I've read and things that I've seen in the past that do make sense, there's been people all along who said that this Russia collusion, Russia investigation was, as they call it, a big nothing burger. And there's people that I respect. There's a Shepherd's Chapel student. Again, some of you who are also Shepherd's Chapel students may be familiar with him. He has his own website that has Bible studies and Bible topics, question and answers that are able to be written to him and answered. His name's Steve Barwick. He's he's a fairly recent personal Facebook friend of mine. And I know that he always believed, in reading his comments, that there was nothing to Russia. There was nothing to any of this. I don't particularly believe that. Now, it could all be drama. It could all be a diversion. But I believe there was something to it. Now, whether it was collusion or not, I don't know. I could say that inasmuch as what Donald Trump Jr. wanted to initiate, or wanted to try to get to when it came to so-called dirt on Hillary at Trump Tower with that Russian lawyer with connections to the Kremlin, I could say that there was maybe a desire to collude, just like as a soundbite I heard on the radio today with former White House attorney Don McGahn being called an unsung hero because reportedly he refused to carry out instructions by Donald Trump to fire or get rid of Mueller, to find a way to end this investigation, which would have been pretty much textbook obstruction of justice. So I could say that there was an attempt to collude, there was an attempt, if not a successful one, to obstruct justice, and I will always believe, just because of some of the things that I have seen, heard, read, personally researched, that there were some ties, whether they were business ties, whether they were money laundering ties, but there was some connection there between Trump and Russia. But how deep it went, what exactly it was, we probably will, quite frankly, never know. But it is interesting to note, and I've seen this before, and this gets me to the point. I've been looking at some of the columns here recently from a gentleman by the name of Chuck Baldwin. Now, Baldwin, just to give you a little bit of background, now, and again, I saw this before, I don't remember if it was from Baldwin or somebody else, a Facebook friend had shared something about collusion between Trump and Israel. And Baldwin, just to give you a little bit of background on him, if you're not familiar, he is or was a Baptist minister of a rather large church in Florida. He also served as the regional vice president of Trinity Baptist College. He was a successful radio talk show host in Florida for almost a decade, I believe. He was the moral majority leader in the state of Florida. He has been and continues to be a print and internet columnist, and he also was a nominee for vice president and president of the Constitution Party. He was the vice presidential nominee or running mate for the Constitution Party ticket in 2004, and he was the presidential nominee of the Constitution Party in 2008, where his running mate was Darrell Castle, who was the Constitution Party's nominee in 2016, who, by the way, I wrote in for president here in Ohio for whatever that's worth. But Baldwin is someone, as I've read his stuff, as far as I'm concerned, he gets it. But I want to talk a little bit, I want to go a little bit into the Bible, and again, I have to be careful with my time, but I want to give a little background on Israel, and just a little bit. And certainly we could spend more time biblically and scripturally and trying to dig out some truths, maybe even as today some falsehoods when it comes to Israel. But again, for time's sake, I want to try to be brief. But Israel, of course, Baldwin, I believe, and this one of these pieces I may cite or read a little bit from, refers to Israel as the third rail of American politics. And they are that. They are the third rail, even you might say, of the American people, American culture, conservative Americans, Christian conservative Americans. I could even say almost, although I don't want to accuse anyone of idolatry, but I could almost say a sacred cow. And that's just a figure of speech. Again, we're not pointing fingers, calling anyone idolaters, although, if we're not careful, we can allow almost anything to become an idol and to get between us and our Heavenly Father. And so it is. But I want to actually pull out a verse, a couple verses, one that I believe is very commonly misused, misinterpreted, but is put out there all the time as one of the reasons why we must always support Israel. And that is Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God, in beginning to talk and beginning to actually to establish his covenant with Abram, who of course would be Abraham. At the time he was still Abram. But in Genesis chapter 12, I'll go with verse 2 actually. And God speaking to Abram, who again would be Abraham, father of many nations, or father of all nations. But in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2, our Father is saying to Abraham, "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." Verse 3, which is what people are always, or quite often quoting, "And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families